You're the ones who are the future of this extraordinary planet, because you'll inherit it. So it is essential, indispensable, that you're included in the conversation on climate change and that you take part actively. Your call for action must be listened to by the most powerful. The world knows how to reduce carbon. We have some solutions, but knowledge is not the same as action. Of course, we can and must be hopeful, but that hope is vain unless we act. Postponing does not serve us. It's not our friend. We simply can't continue to behave and consume in the same way. Taking action on climate change means shifting our attitudes and challenging our behaviour. It will be inconvenient, but it will also become the new normal. We've got to be mindful of consumption, figure out how we live better. We need to inspire each other, not hate and deride each other. But right now, the world seems shaky. It is shaky. There's war. There's a cost of living crisis. And all that tempts people to ignore the long-term climate emergency. Failure to act now, though, will make that emergency far greater than the problems we face today. So seize the moment. Lead by supporting and challenging. Challenge each other too, guide one another, but do it with kindness and with an eye on what the future could look like for you and for the generations to come. Make sure that the generations after you look back and celebrate, because in this time, inspired by you, we did something for the future. What are the tools we can use? Values, kindness, courage, determination, consideration, compassion, generosity. Actions, our behaviour, our performance. Our good intentions leave no marks in history. Our actions leave our legacy across the sands of history. Use your vote if you have it. Be sure to be counted. Communicate. Talk to people about your vision of a bright, prosperous, thriving future. But let us remember those who are now at the sharp end. Those around the world for whom the devastating impact of climate change is causing great suffering already. I said generosity with emphasis because in many parts of the world, we have become wealthy on the basis of the use of our environment, almost our enmity to it, our hostility, treating it purely as a resource and not as a treasure. Changing the future requires sacrifice in the present, and that's real sacrifice. I pray that the God who gave us creation will give you insight and wisdom, hope, courage, that in the love that he has for you, you may express your love for the planet, for all who live here, and especially for those who suffer the most. May God bless your hangout at COP27.
Hi. A vital message. And now, without further ado, Craig, would you like to lead your team up here? We've got some fabulous young voices to hear from. Let's all give them a round of applause.
From a well-respected religious leader, but will it be effective? That's something I'd like to discuss. We've got an incredible panel here today Some statistics before we start. One person dies in East Africa every 36 seconds because of a climate-related incident. 1,700 people have died and millions have been displaced because of the flooding in Pakistan. These are crises now as we see glaciers melting, taking away water, hydration, power from not only villages in the mountains but also downstream where agricultural products that we all use are grown. These are all being impacted, and it's because we're burning fossil fuels and we're polluting the planet. The panelists we're going to talk to today are directly impacted by this, and we want to hear their stories. So I'm going to introduce each one of them and have them come up. Naombi Morris, if you could come up. Naombi is the founder of the non-profit Earth Volunteers, and he's featured in this month's Time magazine with an article about flooding that caused the loss of his home. So if you haven't read that, please have a look at it. It's very powerful. Angela Jong, if you could come up and join us, please. Angela is a first-generation Asian American Harvard sophomore and has also felt the effects of climate personally. And Angela is studying economics. So it'll be interesting to unpack the financial wisdom of paying loss and damage and what that means for future generations. If we could also be joined by Hamira Cobb Singjay. Come up, Hamira, and join us up here. Hamira is a climate and gender justice activist and is the founder of Rise Up Movement and, works for the Rise Up Movement and is the founder of Climate Justice Africa. Correct. Okay, and will talk to us about what's happening on the ground in Uganda. If we can also be joined by Durlab Ashok, who's Plan for the Planet from Pakistan, and Kevin Mtai from Kenya. Kevin is with the Loss and Damage Coalition and is the communications coordinator. And is working on environmental school tour in Kenya, and we'll talk to him about that and what that means. And we've got Ibrahim Mohammed. Now you're going to have to help me with this Ibrahim. Shamsuddin, thank you very much. I've just met Ibrahim and haven't had time to practice the pronunciation of his name. And Ibrahim is from Break Free from Plastic Awareness. He's from Nigeria and is the executive director. So if we can just start and maybe start talking about personal experience. What's happening in Pakistan, for example?
Yeah, it's been crazy, right? Because like in terms of numbers, like it's mind-boggling when you consider like 33 million displaced people, right? These numbers will not do justice the suffering and devastation that has been happening in Pakistan. Like one thing that's a sad as well as tragic is that it's still ongoing, right? The media, especially the international media and national media back in home, right, Pakistan, they have sort of moved on. And it seems to be like, okay, floods came, it went, everything's okay, but it's not, right? So it's really bad looking at the devastation it caused, especially in the province of Sindh and Balochistan. A lot of people were displaced and they still haven't been able to go back to their homes, right? So a lot of suffering there, so yeah.
And Hamira, what's been your personal experience? Uganda hasn't escaped the climate crisis, has it?
No. Like I have been saying the whole time, in my country, just 8 months back, that's counting 8 months behind, we have lost more than 20,000 people to climate-induced incidences. We are right now still dealing with the famine and drought in Karamoja. We have a drought in northern Uganda. We had landslides a few months back in western Uganda. We have, every time it rains, we have floods in central Uganda. And in eastern Uganda, we actually had floods that claimed so many lives, children, mothers, fathers. they didn't even leave plantations and cattle, and this left so much destruction, loss of lives, displacement. It left behind so much destitute in homes and families, and yeah, so we are not, yeah.
It's pretty devastating to hear these stories because it brings a lot of heartache for all of you. Kevin, Kenya, I remember climbing and filming the glaciers there decades ago. Most of them are gone, and in fact, Kenya's going to lose all its glaciers very soon.
Yes. Maybe we talk about Kenya. Yeah, and currently in Kenya, we experience one of the worst droughts. I usually have a friend who shall send me picture every day. Elephants are dying. About every day, we have been losing like 5 giraffe per day. Zebra, wild animals are dying because of the drought in the northern part of Kenya, Kilifi, and different area. Because of the drought, the government doesn't have any money. So most of these animals are dying, and it estimated like 2 to 3 million people are going to suffer from drought. Here I'm talking about children and women, especially in this area, where most of the Kenya, we have now new government. I don't know why they are not taking this as serious. And it was like, it was ironically seeing that the time I was here that our government was able to donate food to another country where inside our Kenya people are suffering.
And not only a personal problem for Kenya in terms of the loss and damage that families have experienced everywhere, but economically, looking forward, particularly for the next generation, is tourism. If the animals go, people won't come to Kenya to witness the beauty that we're seeing, or we've seen in the past, or my generation has seen.
Yeah, tourism being one of our backbone. And as this continues, I think our tourists, especially in our site, because like before I came to COP, I was shooting a documentary about Save Nairobi National Park. And it was a documentary from Extreme 44, Louis Hamilton, and Jack Harris. The time I went to Nairobi National Park, the animals now, they're decreasing in number. We no longer see the animals we see like long time ago. We have like few lions, and now our identity is going. Yeah, our wildlife are dying.
Angela, can you tell us a little bit about your personal experience?
Hello. Hi, yes. So I am very cognizant of the fact that I am from the global north, and so I think any of my experiences in climate disaster will pale in comparison to any of the stories coming on here. But I do want to mention, growing up in Houston, we've also been devastated by a number of frequently occurring natural disasters that have been exacerbated due to climate change. And so one of what I think is the most criminal of the responses is that even if you can't control the hurricane, you can control the government response to it. And so in the most recent Hurricane Harvey, with the onset of flooding, the government decided to they actively chose to open the dams and let the poorer neighborhoods flood in the regions of Houston, so that the richer neighborhoods, the most economically quote-unquote prosperous neighborhoods, would not have to bear the brunt of this, even though they have the sort of financial cushion to do so. And so I think that really ties in with why I wanted to chat today about loss and damage, and I'm excited to hear more from everyone else as well.
Nyombi, now your experience has been widely reported, and storytelling is very powerful because that's how other people understand what people such as yourself are going through in countries like Uganda. Tell us a little bit about that experience, and also about how your story and being able to tell that publicly has helped you talk about the climate crisis and get support for your efforts.
Thank you so much, Craig. Actually, I like all the stories that have been shared, and I believe the power of storytelling is worth it, and it has helped me so much. In 2008, I was just 10 years when the impacts of climate change, mostly the torrential rainfall, hit my village. And what happened there, I was young, but at least I witnessed a lot of people crying after losing their home. During that time, we lost a home and a farm because that heavy rainfall hit all of us who were in the neighborhood. And when the government declared climate emergency in the area, some were sent into camps as it always be. But for us, we had a grandma in Kampala who accepted actually to host us for some good time as we find a way forward. So when we moved, life didn't like continue the way it was, because in Kampala you have to buy food, you have to buy water, electricity. At the same time, my dad has to pay school fees. But remember, in first place, we used to have a farm, and this is where we used to carry out farming. So my dad and mom, who had very little experience on how maybe to look for jobs in town, they struggled to earn a living when they came to Kampala. So life became extremely difficult, to an extent that my dad had to start working on a construction site so that we can survive. But that did not take him so long, because maybe along the way he felt like he can no longer manage and decided to abandon us. So in 2010, he left us. Up to now, I've been raised by a single mom of 3, and studying wasn't easy. Life pushed us, but along the way, I was supported. I've been supported by different people across the world until I completed my studies in 2019. And today, whenever I see a lot of things happening, mostly flooding, I feel so bad, because I know what it means to lose a home. I know what it means to sleep hungry when the next day you have to go to school. I can't count how many days I went to school without food, because sometimes mom couldn't afford buying food, and it was okay to me because I knew what she was going through, and we were 3. So today I see a lot is happening, and even this year, Uganda lost over 34 people in 2 days flooding in eastern Uganda, the same district where I used to be. And I was surprised, because this time around I was the one reporting to BBC, and I was like, no, this is not fair. And this same year, we lost over 900 people in northeastern Uganda, Karamoja region, as Amila said. But this has been linked to the drought, the rising temperatures, and also the mining industries that are taking place in that side. The region is so rich to an extent. We have everything: gold, copper, mine, uranium, but the community is not benefiting. The exploitation continue, and now there happened that we got an attack from locust infestation that ate almost all the green they had. And now when time comes for compensation, no one bothered. And that's why this year we had to lose all those people, because in 2020 there was locust infestation. In 2021, there was no support, no agriculture took place, no farming took place. And people, when you go there today, you cry, because I was there in August and I had to donate my award to them just to survive. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to come back and talk about who should pay. Nigeria also is a resource-rich country. Oil has profited immensely from Nigeria. What's the experience there now, Ibrahim?
Well, for Nigeria, I think the story is no much of a difference. For Nigeria, we are a bit dynamic because of our geopolitical zones. And personally, I will talk about myself and colleagues, friends that are impacted by these environmental disasters. And for my family, we practice subsistence agriculture, which implies all our agricultural produce is what we feed ourselves the whole year. And for our family farm, annually, we harvest nothing less than 35 to 40 tons of maize. But it's so unfortunate, a week before I come to Sharm el-Sheikh, the harvest was performed, and we end up with only 6 tons of maize. And that implies we might only have access to food for nothing more than the quarter of the year. And there are a lot of communities. I visited Dabi community in Jigawa State. It's just a community out of 23 states that are affected by the flood. And that community harvests a landmass of about 1,500 hectares of land. And as I am talking to you, about 1,470 hectares of land is washed away by the flood, which means these people are facing catastrophic food insecurity. And not talking about their houses that are completely demolished, not talking about their food items, properties that are washed away by the flood, because majority of them only survived with their lives, living in shops, abandoned buildings. Schools are filled up with people. It is catastrophic. And I'm sure for us in Africa, we can testify to the fact that she mentioned about 20,000 in Uganda. Morris mentioned a lot of them in Uganda, but I am 100% sure that these numbers are reported. Because if we are going to get the right numbers, they are definitely going to quadruple the statistics we have. This is to tell you how devastating this crisis is to us.
Yeah, well, interestingly, the US, the UK, and the EU have been responsible for more than 50% of industrial emissions since 1850, which is a long time. But what is interesting is that loss and damage wasn't actually considered in the initial treaty, the UNFCCC treaty ratified in 1994. It mentioned support for the climate issues for developing countries, but it wasn't mentioned specifically. And it wasn't until 2009 that countries got together and decided to agree that $100 billion should be spent for vulnerable countries who aren't responsible for the climate crisis to be supported mitigation and adaptation from 2020. Unfortunately, most of your countries haven't seen that money. What is fantastic is that loss and damage is on the agenda for the first time here at this COP27, which is why we're talking about it today. What does it mean to each of you to have the issue brought front and center finally? And how long do you think it will be before developed countries actually start to pay what they owe? If I can start with you.
Sure thing. So it's we are looking forward to what comes out of COP, and it's in a way it's exciting to see any development. But looking at it realistically, right, I personally feel that we are not there yet. Like again, 100 million might be promised, as you mentioned, right, back in previous COPs. But looking at the progress report from the previous COP, right, it's not looking very good. But coming back to your initial question, right, where would it go? What it will look like? So for Pakistan personally, right, the devastation to the infrastructure, especially that has the floods that caused, right, it's in billions, right? So before coming here, I was looking at certain numbers, and I saw roughly, like, World Bank estimates roughly 16 billion just for the infrastructure, right? So we're not talking about any personal or property damages. We are talking about roads, we are talking about bridges, we are talking all the necessary infrastructure for people to live in that particular area, right? So it's still very mind-boggling, the amount of money that would be required for Pakistan. Like, again, there are other countries as well, and like taking a perspective and looking at from this lens, right, 100 billions doesn't look like much, like it doesn't look like a lot, especially considering the latest report that came out that put all these big oil companies profits. It was like roughly 100 billion, right? It's just quarter profit, and you are comparing it to like millions of people that have suffered as a direct consequences of their activities, right? So I think it's a bit unfair, but like, again, the reason why all we are here at this stage is we are hopeful at the end of the day, and yeah, let's see what comes out of COP27. Thank you.
Hemira, is it just a case of people profit before people? Is it that simple?
No, it's not that simple, but I think it's a case of will. I think it was the British that said, where there's a will, there's a way. We see close to $4.6 trillion being invested in fossils every year. And that is the money that goes through banks. And if the people that invest that money, or the policymakers, choose to invest that money in more sustainable energy, in more cleaner energy, in more cleaner investments, I believe another world is possible if we decide to have it. But before I go there, I should remind you that the $100 billion is to help Global South to develop. But while we are moving towards development, we actually are incurring disasters along the way that are not caused by us. It's no secret to everyone here that Africa, that has 54 countries, contributes to less than 4% of greenhouse gases. So $100 billion amongst the global north is not enough. But also, even if it was provided, that's just a foundation for development. While we're developing, our nations are incurring debt to deal with disaster. This debt leaves us in a quagmire of survival. We live on survival mode because, for example, I know families firsthand. I went for burials in Malaba, in Mbale, where the floods happened, that lost thousands and thousands of herds of cattle in the flooding. The children in those families that survived the flooding were pulled out of schools. The girls are now out on bridal mercy because we have to marry you off to get money. The boys are out on the streets trying to make ends meet and survive. This is the status of the global south and Africa in particular. When we ask for finance, we know the climate finance must come. I know the global north is also playing games on that, and it should stop. But we need loss and damage reparations because we did not cause this crisis. We are not responsible for it, but we are at the front line. It's only fair that loss and damage, actually, the money is way overdue. I was hoping this COP, they would actually have a payment plan and not just put loss and damage on the agenda. We are way past that level. We are way past that level. We have so many lives being lost already. So just putting it on the agenda and leaving it there, that is another year, another pushing of this money to help so many lives, so many families, so many communities, and so many countries to develop, if you're looking at development and economic development and social development. But me as a human rights defender, I'm looking at lives, families, futures, our futures, our peace of mind. We sleep in the morning, in the night, and we are not sure we'll wake up in the morning because we're going to wake up underwater. We're going to wake up in floods. We're going to wake up under the soil because there are landslides. We don't know if we'll eat food tomorrow because the prices keep increasing of the food shortages. Keep in mind, Africa is a fertile place. We have historically been able to feed like the whole world if we decided to, because we have fertile land. But the crisis that was caused by the global north has led us to this point. The crisis has turned us into beggars. People who actually, like Nyomi said, people who actually own so many minerals, so many precious jewels and minerals that can actually, we are supposed to be the richest people. We're not supposed to be begging. But because of this, we have turned into that. As I close, or as I finish answering this question, I want the policymakers, or the people in COP, or whoever is in deciding this, to remember that loss and damage is way, 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 way overdue. We are supposed to leave COP27 with a payment plan and not just putting it on the agenda. That is, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you look at the fact that the United States, for example, has contributed about $1.2 trillion in damages to Africa, then you realize that $100 billion just for mitigation and adaptation, without even looking at loss and damage, is a very small figure, but can do so much, not just for Africa in repairing the damage that's been done, but creating infrastructure that's going to benefit, to your point, the rest of the world through the goods and products that are produced in Africa and African countries. Just, Angela, if I can ask you, as an economics student, how what's the process do you think, by which these countries should be made to pay loss and damages? We heard that it's overdue. So what kind of an effect are we going to see for them to do this? Is it as difficult as they make it out to be? Because the two biggest countries that are arguing against this is the United States and the EU, and of course they're the biggest polluters. So they have skin in the game. What does it actually mean to them to pay these monies?
Yeah, absolutely. So having loss and damage on the agenda for the first time this year is exciting in that I'm grateful that like Germany and other countries have started making pledges. I'm excited that there's attention on this issue. There's media coverage. It is now a common phrase, like one that we probably did not really like talk about as much last year. But with that being said, I'm following along with the U.S. negotiations because I'm from the U.S. and one thing that they're doing in the negotiations to try to drag out this financial process is saying instead of addressing loss and damages, responding to loss and damages. And so that means that's like another decade or so before we actually see progress. And I think that in thinking about what loss and damage reparations really looks like, you have to consider that loss and damage is like only one financial mechanism and the only one financial mechanism that we currently have to address these problems. But really, it's because like the global north has to address these problems because like the global north can only exist because of the exploitation of the global south, right? There would not be a global north if you did not have like extraction of the global south. So when you think of like historical like colonial injustices, like what does it mean to put a price on like slavery or like the extraction of like rare minerals from all of these countries, right? And so the current financial structure and having these types of like values of a statistical life means that we can place a number on these damages. But I think that like these lives, but the cultural loss, the erasure of like entire languages, I think that these values are like far beyond numbers. And so that's why we're calling for like exponentially more money being given. And I think the final thing I'll say is one thing that makes me excited is Mr. I believe Ian Fry, the Special Rapporteur on Climate, something along those lines, recently mentioned how the Rio Convention might provide a mechanism to allow more pressure being put on the global north in paying for damages even back into the 1900s. And so I'm excited to see how that goes. I would think that that needs to be more like of the common language around what that looks like, and then we can expand that timeline to further and like into historical injustices, because without a major wealth redistribution, there will continue to be a need for loss and damage reparations.
Kevin, where would you spend the money if COP27 was able to get these countries to commit to a significant amount of money to pay for the damages, and you were the finance minister of Kenya? Where would you start to spend the money?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think you need to understand, first of all, what is loss and damage. And as you know, loss and damage is the impact of climate change beyond adaptation and mitigation. And here I'm talking about economic and non-economic. So what, for example, if I was be a minister, I would be spent mostly in economic and also non-economic. Here I'm going to give out, and the way we want this loss and damage money or climate finance money is not in form of loans, because this is what Global North they have been doing. They have been giving loans to us. For example, here in Kenya, we have a lot of loan, especially for China. They need to give those money in form of different things like grant and other things. So we can spend mostly in try to develop, my friend here say very well about infrastructure. We need to bore some oil, especially in the country where we are experiencing some drought. You need also to build infrastructure. Here I'm talking about education, hospital. Try to also to improve your agriculture. Because what I know, the Global North have the solution. And one lady told me, I think you find sometimes solution doesn't come from COP. Solution come from us. Because we are the one who can bring solution, not those leaders in COPs. Because you find most leaders in COP, they're just there to attend COP to meet these big people, to create more people, but the solution which will come from this youth. That's why you have been finding them most of the time going on street every Friday. Just try to demand the country you need to to have a change. I can give you an example. You remember the time COVID-19 came up. It was immediately scientists, billionaire, everyone was able to call an emergency meeting. They were able to sit down and come with a solution immediately. Within a span of 1 year, we had different types of vaccine. Up to now, we just hear a small kind of maybe cases of COVID-19. And because COVID-19 was affecting mostly people from global north, because loss and damage, climate impact is mostly affecting people from Africa, people from part of Asia, and people from global, like South America, this leader, they are not serious about loss and damage money. I'm very happy because I was one of the people who came here in COP, like the first week to attend this negotiation. And I'm very happy because G7 plus 77 plus China, they were able to sit down and be careful and say we need to pass this loss and damage.
Yeah, and I think to your point, what would be fantastic is if we could get the political leaders, the heads of corporate executives of oil and gas to personally visit and experience what you've experienced in your countries, then we would get a very different outcome, maybe a lot faster. Ibrahim, I want to talk to you about the message that we heard at the start of this panel discussion from the Archbishop. How important is it for religious leaders to weigh in on this subject, and how effective do you think the message coming from someone like the Archbishop will be?
Well, for me, I believe all of us here belong to one religion or the other, and it is a known fact that our people listen more to these religious leaders than us, even though we understand the science. We have experienced the impacts, but if these religious leaders are going to understand these issues and communicate the way it is supposed to be communicated, I'm sure we might not be here. Because topping up to what Kevin mentioned, I think on issues around loss and damage, the global north always focuses on lost priorities. Because just like he gave an example of COVID-19, because the impact is majorly on them, that is why significant progress has been made. And I believe if that is going to continue, then we have a long way to go. Because let's take a look at issues around finance and mitigation and adaptation. The global north keep emphasizing on mitigation. Even the finances for mitigation and far higher, I'm sure, than adaptation. But our scenarios here is that, just like Amira mentioned, we contribute just 4%, and we bear the brunt of the crisis. So why do we focus on mitigation, whereas our scenario is prioritizing adaptation? So there is a disconnect, and I believe this is a strategy to increase inequalities instead of reducing inequalities, because we are bearing the brunt of the crisis, suffering from the impacts of your inactions, and you want us to do what you are supposed to do. So for me, I believe they focus on mitigating their emissions, and we find ways to adapt to our scenarios, because already we are adapting to the impacts of climate crisis, and we have been adapting to the impacts for years. So I think issues around loss and damage are actually, for me, I feel, though I'm excited at the beginning, but bringing it as an agenda, I feel, is just a strategy to shy us away from our focus on ensuring we demand justice. Because it is so unfortunate that we have been having treaties, agreements, but they are not functioning.
So the system's failing.
Yeah, actually, our focus should be real actions, because we are tired of pledges, promises, treaties, agreements, just like the issue of the $100 billion finance. It is more than a decade now, and we have not actualized it. We always come to COPs, they negotiate based on their own interests at the expense of our livelihoods, our development, and our the planet in general. So it's critical that all hands have to be on deck and bringing back religious leaders. For me, I feel all our religious leaders' capacity should be built to understand what we talk about when we talk about climate crisis. They need to clearly understand the impact, even though some of them understand, and I believe some of our religious scriptures clarify the need and importance of protecting the environment. I am a Muslim, and I know that the Quran mentioned that, and the Holy Prophet even mentioned that if you protect the environment, it's sadaqat jariyah, where even if you are late, you keep benefiting, getting blessings and other things from God because of that act. So it means protecting the environment is our civic responsibility, and working with religious leaders is a way forward to achieve that. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, if I can ask you, to what degree should responsibility also land on the leaders of your country, so the leaders of Uganda, for not pushing this hard enough, for not actually forming a strong enough coalition that can get loss and damage and reparations dealt with immediately?
Okay. First, I would say we have a team pushing for that. Even me, I'm pushing for that. So I'm a leader. So when you say our leaders, yes, they are. They are also
has your
in the
approach
room.
been wrong, do you think?
Mhm.
Is it been wrong, or is it where's it failing at the moment?
I think it is failing from the top. Those who have the money are the ones who are not willing to release the funds in time. Because one, we had a delegate here. Actually, we have more than 10 delegates, and 5 were allowed inside on the first day. And even us, we are part, even if we have observer accreditation, we are part, we are pushing for loss and damage. And it's not their fault that the money is not being approved in time. It is the fault of those who have the money. I always see new pledges, even the new Prime Minister of UK, again, promised to multiply from the pledge that is already existing. And I was like, I think you should start your new term by approving what you have. And this is where we go wrong whenever we ask and they don't approve. People turn the focus on our government for not pushing a lot of energy to these people, but they are trying their best. So for me, I would say the top people are the ones who have the power to release this money. Even if you talk, even if you do what, they will not listen to you until their time comes. So for me, when loss and damage was put on an agenda, I wasn't happy. I didn't even celebrate because I know it is a delay. Like as one of my fellow speakers said, they keep on adding that to show that they care, but they don't. I can give an example. Last year, between July and August, UK, Belgium, German, all of them were under attack by floods. The world was like, everyone was talking about it. Look at what is happening in this country. Look at what is happening in this country. And one thing I can tell you, when you go back today, this is 2022, you discover that those countries have already recovered from what happened. Ask yourself, where did they get the money? And why is it so hard for those countries, again, to approve what they promised the global south? It is like they don't care, because for them, they are able to act on what matters to their people, but they can't, like they don't care of what is happening in our countries. But again, we are here to resist and keep pushing for this, because in the end, it's all about us. If we don't do something, our future is at stake. And remember, there's no climate justice without access to food. Today, we are talking about hunger in northeastern Uganda, Karamoja region. These people are able to carry out farming in case they are helped. So how are we going to persuade them to do something when they don't have resources, when they don't have funds, when they don't have seeds, when they don't have sustainable plans to put, like, because even the capacity buildings requires support. I can't bring you as a lecturer to help me or as a professor to help me educate my people without paying you something. So where is that money? My government doesn't have that money and is willing to get these funds and share it within those plans.
Yeah, absolutely. And Humera had to go because she's got another event that she's talking at. But if I can ask you, if you don't receive reparations, if Pakistan, which is suffering terribly at the moment, and it looks like it will continue to, because it's going to require a lot of money to rebuild the infrastructure to simply be able to redevelop lands for farming, let alone property loss. What does the future look like to you in Pakistan right now?
Thank you. So, like again, let me quote the number, right? 33 million, right? These are more people than a lot of developed countries, the population of developed countries, especially in European countries. Or if you were to look at numbers, right, it's more people than the entire state of US, Texas, right? So just wanted to re-emphasize on that's what are at stake. The lives of these 33 million people are at stake, right? And my good friend also mentioned it's not like you can't really have climate justice or talk about anything in relation to basically having a future, right? If you're not having enough money or you're not able to buy food or put food on the table, right? That's where it has to start. It's not looking at, like, right now we are not even at the stage where we can say, oh, we need to build buildings or build hospitals, right? No, food, shelter comes first, and then we can look at what other necessities are there, right? Especially one of my personal agenda coming to COP was looking at the impacts, especially in relation to loss and damage. The children lives take, right, and suffer because of it, because usually they don't get that kind of platform that at least young people like ourselves do, right? And they are not very well represented. For example, let me quote you another number. It's mind-boggling again because of the nature of the damages and the suffering it has caused. So I was reading up again on a research that recently published was roughly like 3 million students in Pakistan will probably not go to school, right? So it's not looking at all the concrete stuff. It's a lot of different small things that you can try to see. So these are all at stakes, not just education. We are talking about the survival of these 33 million people, right? So yes, the government did whatever it can, but looking at the Secretary General trip when he made soon after the floods, he appealed and like there was some funds and everything, but the global response is very inadequate, right? As like all of my colleagues have pointed out. So for me personally, it's not just about infrastructure, but again, that's what I emphasized at the beginning. But it's about that all these 33 million people have a fair chance at life, right? Especially I'm talking about children and young people that don't have the power, especially back home, right? We are the privileged one when you compare at the number of people that are back home suffering from all those climate disasters, right? For example, for me, when the loss and damage or climate crisis became real was back in 2015, because I come from the city of Karachi, right? So that's the most populous city of Pakistan. And in 2015, we experienced very deadly heat waves, right? And a lot of people lost their lives, right? And that point in time, it was like the state wasn't ready. But right now, the state is doing whatever it can, but it has to have the resources to make sure that it is able to deliver. It is able to help those people in needs, right? So it's coming together in this. Again, it's almost seems like it's very terrible that all these different circumstances have come down to this, but again it's nothing new, right? We saw this, like for example back in 2015, but again the government is doing all it can, but again money has to come, finance has to come, but not in terms of loans, as my other colleagues mentioned, right? We don't need loans, right? That's already been happening.
Debt cancellation would be a helpful structure, wouldn't it? Absolutely. And to your point, building schools, education, starting from the ground up, getting kids back at school so that they have a great education and can be part of that rebuilding process is as important as looking at the entire infrastructure. To your point. And what's interesting is you mentioned the heat waves that Pakistan experienced back in 2015, and these are becoming more prevalent all around the world. Since 1970, wet bulb temperature events have doubled, and wet bulb temperature events are where humidity rises to meet air temperature, and when a human is unable to sweat, perspire, to keep themselves cool, which happens at about 28 degrees plus in a wet bulb temperature environment, then we start to suffer enormously, and at 35 degrees it can kill a human in about 2 hours. And these events are happening more and more and more, and particularly in countries. Pakistan has had 2 events now, wet bulb temperatures over 35 degrees. Ras Al Khaimah is the only other place on the planet that has, but above 28 degrees, this has happened even in Europe. And we've seen terrible consequences with many thousands of people dying there. Kevin, what does the future look to you in Kenya at the moment? And is there a positive view there? Is there optimism?
Yeah, I think on my side, I'm very happy for the new government, which has just entered into the office. Our president was here, and he has been one of the people who have been trying to push, and most of the leader, because I remember I was able to work with one of our leaders, write for him a manifesto, and then in our country, most of the leaders now, they have been able to take climate change as serious. And you know about climate anxiety is the thing which have been happening most of us, because you are fighting the battle which you are seeing you are not going to win. And because I'm saying this, you are able to see one of the most, maybe I don't want to mention the name, one of the most polluted company sponsoring this COP. How are we going to fight this war with the same enemy in the table? That's the thing we need to answer, maybe to ask ourselves, and also to ask the organizer of COP27. Because you're not going to win this war if you are with the same people on the table discussing the progress about loss and damage. And because what we need to do, especially most of the time, we need to include these people who are being mostly affected by impact of climate change to be on the table. We have been in the blue zone, we have been seeing how most of the leaders they have been working with 7 bodyguards, 8 bodyguards. You just need to set aside for this only one person to pass. And you know, most of the observers are the one who have been trying to bring changes, not these leaders who are just sitting there in the fancy hotel, enjoying. Because last year in COP, I was able to go in one of the registration to ask, can you maybe tell me how many people from Kenya they were able to come and get their badge? It was very saddened to see that we had more delegates coming from Kenya, but a few people they were able to come to pick their badges, because we have been having this kind of known as COP tourist. Some politicians are just coming here to enjoy themselves, and then they're going back home. They're not going to come to negotiate. That's why you have been finding mostly Americans and Europeans. They have been beating us in most of this negotiation, because as an African, we are not working as a bloc. That's the problem. We find most of us, we are coming to COP to enjoy ourselves, to dance in the sea, but not attending negotiating rooms. That's the problem we need to ask mostly our leaders from our country. We find, like, for example, most of this from the party badges, like, I know you know, scratch my back, I scratch you. I'm going to give you a party badge because I know you're going maybe to visit. So, for example, me, I can come with my family, 10 people from my family, go to attend COP. Only one person is come to attend COP, but the other just enjoying themselves. We experienced that the time we were in COP. Also, I think the same year, and I think there is an article which I also mentioned today that we have also many fossil fuel observer
an increase
compared to last year.
An increase of 25% of oil and gas lobbyists, more than 600. I think the count was 632 lobbyists. If they were a country, they would be the largest country voice at COP27, which is ridiculous when you think about it. Angela, as a student in the global north and studying the economy, what do you think your responsibility is, and are you optimistic for the future, particularly on the issue of loss and damage and reparations?
Yeah, definitely. So, as a student, I obviously am here as an observer rather than as a negotiator. And so, I think a lot of my role is to put pressure on those who are negotiating on behalf of the U.S. We recently had a bilateral with the Assistant Secretary of State, Ms. Monica Medina, who reports to John Kerry, and I'm excited to hear from her as to next steps. So, I think we're trying to collaborate, we're trying to put in the effort to work and cooperate. But when that doesn't happen, we also need to look towards alternative means of making sure that we get shit done, right? And so what that looks like can be like, so some people from my delegation were asking the climate envoy John Kerry questions yesterday because we like the U.S. loves to pride itself on passing the IRA, but there's a lot of like dirty side deals. There's questions about like oil and gas lobbying in general in the United States as well. And these are all things that sort of fuel and motivate us to keep on doing more. And so I think that, like, obviously coming from the global north, my place is not the one to like lead the movement by any means. But I think that without having people from the global north here pushing for change as well, then a lot of the pressure would be taken off. And so it's sort of this give and take. And I'm also excited to see more and more universities sending delegations of students as well, to young people who finally have exposure to the process, who can finally imagine themselves in the future as a negotiator.
Nyombi, as we go forward and look at the future, is this a generational issue? As we see older executives leaving oil and gas industries and politicians as well, we're going to see young leaders such as yourselves here step up to the plate and start to have an incredible impact, as you already do. Is it a generational issue, and what's your hope for the future?
Yeah, I would say it is a generational issue because we are going through this as young people, and as you see, we are all rising up. You can see even those who are not so much facing the impacts are also supporting us because we are working together with those activists from Global North. You can see that this is a generational cause, so we need to stand up together. And as it is a global crisis, so for me, I know however much things are happening all over the world. News are sharing a lot of flooding, washing away people's houses. Young people are on ground doing something. So for me, that is the hope I have, that many young people are leading global movement, are standing up, but at the same time are taking action. I can say, like, I could give an example. Kevin is doing something in schools. I'm doing something in schools. I have many young people here in Uganda who are leading global strikes and also who are taking action. I have a friend who is having an organization that is working so much on gender equality. You know, there is no climate justice without gender equality. So I'm so happy that young people have risen up and have started noticing how they can play a role in the fight. So for me, that's where my future lies. But again, if we are still working with companies like the one that is sponsoring this COP, so like I don't have a lot of hope in this conference. Even I said this even the first day, that no way they can't be with polluters and expect any clear negotiation or beautiful results. So for me, the hope is in young people, and I'm so happy with that because even me, I'm creating hope by taking action. That's where I lie my hope.
Yes, and Ibrahim, who's a plastics campaigner, as am I made a film called A Plastic Ocean, which looked at the issue, and the success of the awareness from that film came from young people who watched the film and went home to their parents and asked them why they were wrapping their sandwiches in plastic, and their parents asked them what they were talking about, and they took them to see the film, and they started that conversation. So that was, we think, as the filmmakers, that a lot of the awareness from the film actually came from young people moving the needle extraordinarily by engaging their parents in the issue. Ibrahim, to what degree do you think that's important with the issue of loss and damage? And how much awareness is there amongst your friends and colleagues about the Global North's role in this issue and the Global South as vulnerable countries to the degree that young people now have a certain responsibility, and even my generation are looking to young people for hope for the future. How much of that responsibility do you feel, and how optimistic are you about the future carrying that responsibility?
Well, before actually, earlier on, I was not hopeful in respect to that, but I had some conversations with some people in grassroots communities, and I get to realize to improve and actualize this intergenerational progress we are looking at and we are hopeful to achieve, we have to adopt effective strategies to communicate these issues, because over the years I get to understand that if we use languages these people that are vulnerable understand, they tend to take ownership better. And I did a research to find out how effective that is, and we did an awareness project especially for grassroots communities, and we tend to realize that most of our women battle with impacts of indoor air pollution, and as a result of cooking with firewood and charcoal. And we believe, since these people are communities that are solely dependent on agriculture and they have abundance of agricultural biomass, why not learn how to train them to convert this waste to briquettes, which might serve as an alternative? And we started that, and occasionally we visited a community where majority of the participants don't actually understand English, and we were advised to use the local language to understand. And I was amazed that when we use the local language, they share more ideas. They have ideas that we don't even have on how to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the briquettes. And I realize and understand that if we are going to keep using these local languages, they understand, they take ownership, and they will do the best they can, because addressing or working towards addressing the climate crisis is a collective responsibility. In as much as they are vulnerable, they have to do something to address the issue. And they can only do that when they understand the whole scenario, because we know our scenarios, we know our circumstances, and we technically cannot address a problem that we don't understand. I'm sure I'm right, isn't it? It is only when we understand the problem that we will be hopeful and we will be committed to addressing that problem.
Well, I think as scientists tell us that keeping 1.5 alive is becoming increasingly difficult, if not impossible. As we continue to put industrial emissions into the atmosphere, we are heading towards 2.7 degrees. And as we watch already the extreme weather events that climate is causing as a result of burning fossil fuels, primarily from developed countries, we're going to see the issues we've talked about here today, I think, become much worse in the countries that you're all from. Thank you very much for joining the panel today. I've learned an enormous amount, a great deal from your personal experiences here. And I hope, and I will promise you that I will continue to campaign for your countries to be paid the reparations that I think all of us believe you deserve. Certainly, if we're going to have healthy economies globally, we need the economies of countries in Africa and Asia to be healthy as well. And that means paying reparations for the damage that's been done. Thank you very much for joining us here at Extreme Hangout. My name is Craig Leeson. It's been a pleasure to present this panel for you.